TV. I was getting silver. All those guys didn't get what I got.
Yeah.
On the day.
Okay, Kenneth, I'm gonna ask you to quickly speed up the point that you want to make, because there are long long moments of silence in between your words, and you know what they say about radio: dead air is not allowed.
Adrian.
Yeah.
And then, my wife or my house was blowing away the roof. They fired me because I didn't attend.
You didn't attend what? Okay, sorry there, Kenneth. In those pauses in between as well. Stelos joining us from Gqeberha. Good afternoon or good evening.
Adrian, good evening to South Africans. First, I want to appreciate you, your researchers, and the program manager for consistently bringing up topics that are talking to us, ordinary South Africans.
Thank you. Thank you for indulging us as well.
Yes. Look, I resigned in 2006 after 14 years with my previous employer. I resigned, but I never resigned. I physically submitted the letter. I left the company, but emotionally, I think I'm tied forever to the employer that I had. I am telling you, when I resigned, everything was going for us. When I say us, I mean myself, the employer, and the colleagues around me or the workers. We were the transformation going around those periods of times in the country.
Yeah.
Going, we were seeing the production of the company going. It was the situation that anyone would want to be. And unfortunately, there was a national call that was made for one to consider, and I had to take up the national call. But you know what the company
as
did?
a patriot. What did the company do?
Back when you submit a resignation letter, they wrote back to appreciate all the good things that you did not realize that you did for them. Winning those international awards, winning the national awards, being the good employee in the company. They wrote back, Adrian.
Yeah.
Made an offer that this is your home and anytime.
Hey.
Well, serious. And when I went to the general colleagues and employees, I was allowed an opportunity to convene a meeting. One of those employees in the company. And I convened. That was the most difficult one. That of informing your colleagues and the employees in the company that what you are leaving. You end up crying.
Yeah.
Cry around you. People say, why are you leaving us? And it was a national call. Even today, I still dream pounding the floors and running the campaigns in that company. And it was a company that I loved. They loved me back. I did a lot of things. But resignation was the most difficult thing.
Yeah.
It was it, but it was difficult. Emotionally, one is still tied up there.
Yeah, and it also sounds like you had a very beautiful, healthy relationship with your colleagues as well as the bosses. 0614-104-107.
Good evening, Aldrin. You know, this topic reminds me of what happened to me way back in 1984 when I resigned my post as a teacher at one of the schools in the Eastern Cape. You know, when I gave my boss the letter that I was resigning, he was so cross. He tried to tell me not to, but I said, no, I've made up my mind, I'm resigning. You know what he did? During those times, we were not paid through the bank. He had to go to the circuit office and collect our checks. And when he came back, I went there to queue for my check. He said to me, he doesn't have my check and he doesn't know where my check is. You know, I had to go after the holidays to go and collect my check at the second office. That's it.
Anonymous is joining us from Joburg. Good evening.
Yeah, hello. Good evening. I'm a professional healthcare worker who has resigned today.
Today?
A mixed feeling.
Yeah.
As I really enjoy working with my patients. And unfortunately, as I think everybody knows countrywide, the public health sector is collapsing. And in my specific case, also there's no working for promoting my personal development and growth. They were obstructing it, and instead lifting up, they was tearing up. So under such circumstances, despite the love I have for my profession and my patients, it is an unbearable situation, and so who is
Anonymous, the line is also deteriorating there, but thank you so much for putting through the phone call. Unfortunately, the network isn't stable, but thank you so much for the call and all the best in your new journey. Do get in touch with us as well when you tell us about your new job. Maybe that's a conversation that we should be having during the bonding session as well. Starting a new job, the difficulty around that as well. But also, as one of the listeners said a bit earlier on, the fear of the unknown, the uncertainty that comes into, the uncertainty that plays out once you walk into this new environment, new people that you're meeting as well. But it's always a great experience, at least on my side. We've come to the end of the show. Thank you so much for choosing SAfm BTH with me, Aldrin St-Pierre. Today we're playing out with Azana, Your Love, and our parting shot is from Peter Pan, who once said, "Goodbyes are not forever, are not the end. It simply means I'll miss you until we meet again." And Siyabonga is reading our credits this evening.
And in closing, thank you to Captain Aldrin, Vusi, Mpho, Zai, Temba, Ntabiseng, Andisa. Thank you, team. This is Siyabonga Mbuli from Escort.
And remember to love each other and lead with compassion. Dotsins, enjoy the rest of your evening and your weekend.
This is Aldrin St-Pierre on Beyond the Headline. BCX is one of Africa's leading systems integrators. For over 40 years, we have strived to develop and implement the technology solutions businesses need to thrive. Independent and impartial. This is SAfm News.
Load shedding likely to continue, and a call on the new Joburg mayor. Good evening. The Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan says it's likely that Stage 4 load shedding will continue into next week. He was speaking during a media briefing where he announced Eskom's newly appointed board members.
Part of the reason that we are at level 4 is firstly, planned outages are still sitting around 5,000, unplanned outages also around 15,000, and those need to be rapidly reduced in order that more megawatts are available. And the expectation, is that many units will be returning over the next 72 hours to service. And if all goes well, there'll be more megawatts available on the system.
Thank you, team. This is Siyabonga Mbuli from Escort.
Not sure where that interruption was coming from, but we'll continue with the news bulletin. A group of minority opposition parties in the City of Joburg Council has called on newly elected Johannesburg Mayor Dada Morero to be accountable, transparent and work to improve the lives of the people. The 7 parties who brought the motion of no confidence against the former council speaker Vasco da Gama and now ousted mayor Mpho Phalatse have a total of 10 seats in the council. They include the PAC, UDM, AIC, Al-Jamaa, APC and the Good Party. A councillor for the African Independent Congress and chairperson of the minority opposition parties is Margaret Arnolds.
We are excited. The only thing we are saying is that the mayor must remember that the position that he has right now is a position for the people, and he must not make the mistakes that Mpho Phalatse made. He needs to be accountable, he needs to be transparent, and we know that he has all the integrity.
The mayor of the Lephalale municipality in Limpopo, Alpheus Tulares, finally resigned. He was reluctant to resign after the ANC PEC took a decision that he should step down to make way for another councillor. He also lost an urgent application in the High Court in Pretoria which sought to stop the ANC from removing him. He was appointed as mayor on an interim basis while the party was dealing with the candidates list dispute during the previous local government elections. He says he's tendered his resignation to allow party processes to unfold.
I'll therefore have to relinquish or to be redeployed so that the relevant person can be deployed. In fact, that's why this morning I saw it fit that I should resign.
Several hospitals in KwaZulu-Natal are among health facilities in the country that will be exempt from load shedding. The Durban hospitals are Mahatma Gandhi, Osindentweni, St. Aidan's, Annington and Clarewood. The Health Minister Joe Phatla announced the list of exempted hospitals after an outcry that load shedding is putting patients' lives at risk.
In KwaZulu-Natal, we have Harry Gwala Hospital, the Grace Hospital, Ladysmith Hospital, Prince Msheni in Mlazi, RK Khan, Chatsworth, Inkosi Albert in the eThekwini, Mekots also in eThekwini, King Dinizulu eThekwini, Mandela Children's Hospital.
The Anglican Church of Southern Africa's Provincial Standing Committee is resolved to highlight the plight of people of Palestine in all its churches during annual observances. This follows a week-long meeting by the committee and Provincial Synod of Bishops. In a statement, it says parishes have been requested to highlight the plight of Palestinians on a Sunday towards the end of November, ahead of the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people on November 29th. The Provincial Standing Committee also resolved to co-host the annual commemoration of the displacement of Palestinians on May 15th with other groups. It says this is the day during the conflict which occurred around the establishment of Israel as a state in 1948. The top story, the Public Enterprises Minister says it is likely that Stage 4 load shedding will continue into next week. That's SAfm News. I'm Greg Khos.
Reimagine evolution. Contact BCX today to find out how we can give your business the power to grow. bcx.co.za. BCX is one of Africa's leading systems integrators. We have the expertise, skills, and experience to deliver the technology your business needs to digitally transform. From mining, oil, gas, and financial services to commerce, healthcare, telecoms, retail, and the public sector. We connect businesses across the continent, securely providing the technology and services that enable them to create, innovate, and reimagine how they serve their customers. Find out how we can give your business the power to grow. Visit bcx.co.za.
Giving you new perspectives and information with deep dive expert analysis of the biggest stories that shaped your world this week.
It is 5 minutes, almost 6 minutes after 6 p.m. It's a Friday. This is time for This Week Today. My name is Oliver Dickson, and it's a pleasure and honor to be in your company up until 7 p.m. this morning. This is where we take a pause, we slow things down, and dig into the conversations that were topical in the week, but find the perspective, the angles, and the layers to the conversation that we perhaps did not peel back enough and explore enough. We add different texture to the conversation and look at alternative perspectives. And that's exactly what we'll be doing tonight. In our first story tonight, we're going to be focusing on Eskom. This morning, I called a good friend of mine, Colin Coleman, the former CEO of Goldman Sachs South Africa, and I asked him, Colin, what do you think would be good qualities and a good configuration and a good makeup of the new Eskom board? And that's what I wanted to speak to him in part about tonight. And lo and behold, 2-3 hours ago, a new board was announced. So that conversation is kind of moot, right?
But Colin makes a jarring argument. He says that, and he's made this argument for a while, that National Treasury should consider taking on some of Eskom's debt. Eskom is in debt in excess of 400 billion. It's the financial health of Eskom is poor, and this is common cause. It has been for a while. Important questions around how we got here need to be asked, and journalists often report on that. And last week, I had a conversation with veteran journalist Hilary Joffe about exactly that. But the question now should be, what do we do about this going forward? The medium-term budget speech is coming up in a couple of weeks, this month, in about 2 to 3 weeks. And the Minister of Finance will have to say something about Eskom, especially about its financial health, given that we're smack bang in the middle of a inflation rally and Eskom is asking NERSA for a 32% tariff hike. You and I, as consumers, will be cushioning that cost. Something needs, because Eskom needs more money, it needs better revenue collection, but it's not yet there. The pressure might not be the same if Eskom's debt wasn't as bad as it is. So we'll dig into that. A bit later on in the show, 2 important developments that happened this week. National Treasury announced the blacklisting of Bain and Company for the next 10 years from doing work with any government agency. Of course, Bain and Company found itself at the center of controversy for work it did with SARS, the South African Revenue Service. And just today, the NPA announced that it will be prosecuting McKinsey and some of its directors. It's quite interesting that we see rapid and quick movements so short after each other on private sector players around corruption and state capture. But does this mean that the tides are turning? Does this send a strong signal to corporate South Africa about its own complicity in corruption and in state capture? And will we see a change and a shift in its ethics and its behavioral relationship with the state? That conversation is coming up a little later on, an incredibly important conversation. But right now, we speak to Colin Coleman. Colin sits on various boards, co-chair and co-founder of the Youth Employment Service Program in the presidency, as well as the former CEO of Goldman Sachs Sub-Saharan Africa.
Stay on top of all meaningful, top trending stories right here on SAfm. Leading the conversation. This week, today, Fridays, 6 to 7 p.m.
Colin, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. Let's perhaps start with the conversation that has run moot at this stage. Did Eskom need a board reconfiguration? And if so, what sort of qualities, what sort of board, what sort of skill sets perhaps are required on such a board to turn around a mega institution like Eskom that's deeply in trouble?
Thanks so much, Oliver, and welcome to your listeners on a Friday evening. I'm sure they want to go and enjoy their Friday evening and not necessarily listen to us and our problems about Eskom, but it's very important. It's I call the largest systemic risk facing South Africa in 2017, 5 years ago. So I think the what you want at this point in time is to reboot the performance of Eskom, and that has several characteristics. The one is the operating function, particularly around the generating capacity. There's 40,000 megawatts of power that has been operating at half its capacity, causing load shedding and massive problems, including negative impacts on our economy as a whole. Number two, the operating environment and the management of Eskom, which has basically seen a significant bloating of its workforce and underperformance of its operations and a massive wage bill. And then thirdly, a financing situation where the balance sheet of Eskom has blown up to 400 billion rand of debt against its earnings, what we call earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization, which is the important earnings ratio that bankers look at, of about 32 billion rand last time I saw it, relative to the net debt of Eskom of over 400 billion at last count, which means its net debt to EBITDA is 12.5 times. Now, in international terms, no utility that is a going concern can have net debt to EBITDA of over half that, probably more like 5 times. But even if we took 200 billion rand of EBITDA of net debt out of Eskom, you'd still have net debt to EBITDA of around 6 times. So it's a minimal condition. And in simple terms, for people who run their own small businesses or medium-sized businesses, if a company isn't earning its cost of capital, basically, it's not returning its cost of capital, then it's broken. It's not going to be able to function. And Eskom is not returning its cost of capital. So that is why they're trying to increase the cost of electricity to South Africa, or the price of electricity to South Africans. But the reality is then South Africans will say, well, why is your cost so high relative to your earnings? And that's where the management and the board have to dig into, what is the cost of running the company? Why are they paying so much for diesel? Why are they paying so much for the workforce? Why are there so many workers and executives earning? I saw an indication that the average salary at Eskom is 700,000 rand or thereover at Eskom for its 40,000 employees, or whatever its number of employees is, and that's just too high. So, these 3 interrelated issues have to be addressed, and you have to have a board that can deal with the operating, management, and financing issues, and have the correct expertise, or the mix of expertise. And then I know you're going to ask me, so what do I think of this new board? And all I'm going to say is we all...
My apologies for that feedback. Go ahead, Colin.
We all as South Africans have to give this board a chance. But I think that what we're seeing is a board that's much better than the previous board, even if one would have wanted to see some heavy hitters in industry and mining and so on and so forth, and finance on the board. But we have to give this board a chance. And the chairman is someone who knows, and Paul Makwana, he's someone who knows Eskom well, and is chairman of Nedbank now, and we wish them well.
Yeah. Let's maybe go back to some of those figures you mentioned. 400 billion in debt. You say if we remove 200 billion of that debt by the fiscus absorbing it, it would still be 6 times over-debted, right? And that too is still not healthy enough. But let's say the starting point is 200 billion. Treasury has to find that money somewhere, right? Where would it currently find that money? What would be the opportunity cost of the 200 billion, given that we have such a massive social expenditure burden within the budget cycle? More importantly, what would that do to the fragility of the fiscus, especially when ratings agencies are zooming in closely on every rand that's being spent in South Africa?
Let's be clear that 200 billion debt that I referred to is all government guaranteed. So on the rating agency score sheet, actually in the footnotes of the rating agency reports and sovereign ratings, they have counted that 200 billion in their calculation of overall government debt already. What they haven't done, what the finance world has not done, is written up that debt into the net debt number of South Africa. So the debt to GDP of South Africa is 68%, relative to our 6.5 trillion GDP size, rand. There's about 4.5 trillion of debt that we are responsible for. So we'd add this 200 billion to the 4.5 trillion. So effectively, we would be adding around 3% to our South African net debt to GDP and take the 68% back to 71% in our net debt to GDP number. But bear in mind that we at the peak were 71% net debt to GDP. So from my point of view, actually the markets would say, in reality, we know that that is a liability of the state. It's government guaranteed. And by absorbing it and taking it off Eskom, it would be a credit rating bullish and actually a pricing bullish to both bonds and to the rand, to the currency, because it would be effectively dealing with one of the key questions. And what effectively I would suggest should be done, but there are various ways of achieving that. This is that the government take on the 200 billion rand directly onto the balance sheet of the sovereign. Why? Because the sovereign rating is better. The South African sovereign rating is better in the capital markets than Eskom's rating. And all that you're doing is effectively taking 200 billion rand of debt onto the South African balance sheet. And you would be effectively achieving a lower cost of interest that will save South Africa about 3 billion rand of interest cost per year by it being on South Africa's balance sheet rather than on Eskom's balance sheet. And you'd be liberating Eskom from a 12 times net debt to EBITDA to around a 6 times net debt to EBITDA, which is much closer to where a sustainable EBITDA has to be. Now, the question, obviously, Oliver, is what happens going forward? And this is where the 3-year mandate of this new board is so important, because they then have to basically get the operating and return on capital system of Eskom to be improved, the operating system to be improved such that it starts to earn its return on capital, brings its operating costs down, gets its generating fleet to work better, saves on diesel, and basically gets Eskom into a sustainable footing and brings the EBITDA up. Let's say they can bring the EBITDA from 32 billion to 40 billion, then they are effectively bringing the net debt to EBITDA down further. So they get it down to 5 times. That, from a banker's point of view, will start to make Eskom look healthy again and more sustainable. And what that will do is also bring the cost of debt down, because the markets will say now Eskom is effectively, coming to grips with its problems. The government is coming to grips with a critical systemic problem, and the interest cost would fall, and with it, sustainability would rise. So this is all an interconnected system, which is the key task, I think, of Eskom.
Should the optimization of Eskom's operational capacity and potential not precede the shift of its debt burden? I ask this because on the face of it, Colin, it seems to me like an artificial cosmetic massage of the numbers to say that if you shift the debt to the sovereign, Eskom's debt burden drops and it becomes a lot more attractive to bankers, right? Granted, you say that must be interconnected with a business case as to how it aims to improve its operational capacity, cut the fat, as well as improve revenue and optimize its commercial potential. Should the one not come before the other? Because it seems to me that once you shift the debt, it doesn't automatically mean that it becomes a fitter organization.
It's equivalent to a doctor being asked not to perform heart surgery on a patient that's about to die on the operating table because they are not well, not healthy, have become obese and have eaten too much. Now, obviously, the patient needs to go on a diet, but the patient needs an operation, and you need to give that patient oxygen. This Eskom is in the ICU on its deathbed. If we do not feed it and get it back onto its feet, it will die. And with it, the South African economy. Just bear in mind, Oliver, the rand. Now, all currencies have been hit in the world by dollar strength, but the rand in the last 3 months has effectively dived 12%. So the depreciation of the rand is 12%. This is massive. And the load shedding that we've experienced is a very large contributing factor to this problem. So it is systemic to South Africa that we fix Eskom, and we have to operate on this patient. And we have to basically, in order to operate on this patient, give this new board, and the government needs to do everything to give this new board all its support, including giving it the oxygen of liberating its balance sheet to a healthy state.
Should the government make this conditional? That's to say, should National Treasury say, look, we'll take 200 billion away from your debt burden, off of your debt book, on condition that you don't go ahead and ask for a 32% tariff hike, because that will impact consumers, businesses and households adversely, especially given that we're in a global inflation rally, as well as, a war going on in Ukraine, which makes energy costs significantly high regardless anyway. Should this move be conditional?
Again, the doctor on the operating table doesn't say, I'll only operate if you sign that you're going to go on a fitness regime, go to gym every day, and stop eating too much red meat.
Maybe the doctor should.
But the doctor can say, certainly when the patient wakes up having been operated on, that if you don't go on this diet, if you don't do these things and these following conditions, then I'm not going to treat you anymore. So I think it's absolutely clear that the government effectively has appointed this board. The board must now be left to do its job. It has to fix the operating fleet. It has to bring its operating costs down with its employees and with its diesel and with its coal. The coal industry has to provide clean coal at lower prices. And the corruption around Eskom's transport, its coal, the infrastructure, all of that has to stop. The police have to prosecute the perpetrators of the corruption, and we have to see everybody, effectively do everything to fix Eskom.
Yeah, just maybe a last theme for us to explore. A lot of people argue that the problem at Eskom is perhaps not a technical one. It is a political problem. And it doesn't matter how much you want to wax lyrical about the technical issues. And by the technical issues, I mean both its engineering and financial operating, mechanisms. If you don't deal with the political problem of Eskom, you're not going to solve any problem at Eskom. Part of what they call the political problem is an over-interference by the shareholder. Do you agree that there's a political problem at Eskom that needs attention?
Well, it's obviously a lack of coherence around energy policy between the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Energy, the Minister of Public Enterprises, the Minister of Transport, and the President must own that. In other words, they need to have a joined up set of policies around fixing energy. The government can't run away from that. South Africans must demand from its government that energy policy, which is critical to the overall functioning of the economy, to jobs and so on, is fixed. And the government now must support the board that it's put in place and provide it with all the freedom and all the tools to succeed. And this is absolutely critical. If we don't see that happening, the public is certainly in any democracy capable of voting with its feet and voting with the political parties that it wants to support. I have said in a different context that I think a political rupture in South Africa is coming because the society is not functional at this point in time. What we have is over 40% broad unemployment. We have mass hunger in South Africa. We have dysfunctionality, and we have a looting of our infrastructure by corrupt elements, which is extremely concerning. And we need the economic, judicial, prosecuting, and political system to reboot in order to have all of these entities function and work, and Eskom is one of the critical parts.
Yeah. And just a last question. When the Minister of Finance takes to the podium in Parliament 3 weeks from now in his medium-term policy statement, what should the Minister of Finance say about Eskom to be done in the short term?
Critical, good question. on the 26th of October, when he delivers the medium-term budget statement, we shouldn't hear what he's going to do. The minister should announce there that he has negotiated with the debt holders of Eskom and all stakeholders a refinancing of Eskom, and announce the results of that refinancing at his speech. Now, that's a lot to ask because it's a lot to achieve, but we can't wait forever for these things to be done. Unfortunately, our politicians are in the habit of making speeches and thinking that their words and speeches equate to things getting done. It doesn't. So when any minister says, okay, we are going to take 200 billion rand off Eskom's balance sheet and put it on the government's balance sheet, well, all it means is that they're going to enter into a discussion with the institutions, the credit rating agencies, the debt holders about that. And that can take several weeks. It's very important that we get these things done and executed. So I'm hoping that the minister will announce on the 26th of October that this program has been executed. I hope that we will see the bonds rally, the currency rally, and Eskom end up in a position where it is given a new life and a new hope that it is going to be able to enter into a sustainable phase. And over time, it's not going to be a magic fix, quick fix, but over time we can get rid of load shedding in South Africa.
Yeah. Colin, thank you so much for your insights on this. Really, really do appreciate it. And I hope this really sparks a conversation within the National Treasury about taking on this program. Maybe just an unrelated issue. And it's okay if you don't have a comment on this. We certainly didn't, discuss this. But when you saw the news of the NPA announcing that it will prosecute McKinsey, when you saw Treasury announce the blacklisting of Bain, how did you feel? And I'm asking this as a senior business leader in South Africa.
The former CEO of Goldman Sachs, Sub-Saharan Africa, and a partner of a global institution, it's certainly a moment to see one of these large institutions like McKinsey and Bain prosecuted. I mean, these are very big steps for any of those institutions to absorb, and these are lessons that these institutions need to take very, very seriously. That in places like South Africa, you have to have very rigorous controls over your employees and over your partners, and ensure that when you're doing business, you ask, why are we doing this business? Should we be doing this business? Not just can we be doing this business? Are our clients understanding what they're doing? And are we putting this proper controls and global systems in place to ensure that our reputations are secure, that we're doing the right kind of business? And if at the end of the day, they commit acts which cause them to be prosecuted, they have to be held to account.
Yeah, absolutely. Colin, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it.
Pleasure.
That is Colin Coleman. What do you make of that? Give us a call. The number to dial is 086 000 2032. 086 000 2032. You can send us a WhatsApp voice note on the WhatsApp line 0614 104 107. Tweet me at Oliver_speaking. I'm also on Facebook, Oliver Dickson over there. And you and I can engage on these issues and take the conversation forward. But I am looking forward to taking your calls and your WhatsApp voice notes. Again, the open line number is 086 000 2032. And our WhatsApp line is 0614 104 107. On the other side of this, I'm going to be speaking to Advocate Stephanie Fick, who is the Executive Director of the Accountability Division at OUTA, the organization undoing tax abuse, as well as Tebogo Kas, who is the founder and chair of Interest South Africa. We're going to be talking about the last question I asked Colin, about National Treasury announcing the blacklisting of Bain and about the NPA announcing the prosecution of McKinsey. Is this a moment of accountability to the private sector that we've been waiting for, where it reckons its own complicity in undoing the state and, enabling wanton looting of the livelihoods of South Africans? That conversation on the other side of this.
SMS SAfm now on 41391. If you're active on social media and love SAfm, we hope you'll take a moment to like or follow our SAfm page on Facebook and Twitter. These are the best places to find all the guest information, conversations, and stories you love from your favorite presenters, along with regular updates from SABC News. And don't forget, you can send your questions to feedback@safm.co.za. SAfm, leading the conversation. The SABC News Portal is your one-stop digital platform for all the news you need. Stay connected with the latest and breaking stories. Listen to all SABC radio stations live, including podcasts, and also watch the SABC News channel with clips and live streams of all the big news events. Simply download the SABC News app on your smartphone from the Play or App Store. SABC News, independent and impartial. The Jet Set Breakfast.
We're talking about oral signage as opposed to written signage. So what do we take from this, and what do you take from this in your studies and your teachings?
Being from the Northern Cape, I understand landscape differently. So I'm very insistent about understanding that we cannot always assume that people know how to navigate based on what they read, or, you know, a sign saying 5 kilometers from here, turn right, or whatever. There is still significance in how people use orality to navigate spaces, especially in small towns, and especially in places where there is no signage. And so my research is very intentional about showing how people use different types of resources, I guess, to navigate spaces where written signage is not popular. So I go to municipalities, I'm like, why is there no written signage? And they said there was, it was just vandalized.
Michelle Constant on the Jet Set Breakfast. At SAfm Radio and at Oliver_speaking on Twitter.
It is 27 minutes before the top of the hour, and you are listening to This Week Today here on SAfm. My name is Oliver Dickson. A pleasure being with you. If you're watching this live on our YouTube channel, on all our social media platforms, that is on Facebook as well as on Twitter, you will notice that we're experiencing a technical difficulty, and that's Ntabi saying right next to me, making sure that we overcome that difficulty as we head into our next conversation. Now, critically important, National Treasury announced the blacklisting of Bain & Company. The NPA announced the prosecution of McKinsey, Bain relating to SARS, McKinsey relating to Transnet. These were defining moments in our democracy in the last 10 years. These were moments where we quite literally saw that corruption is not a group of politicians hiding in a corner somewhere. Corruption is politicians shaking hands with senior business executives of multinational corporations, colluding to do wrong. And oftentimes in the conversation, we leave out the other part. The senior business executives of multinational corporations, chasing a buck, but not caring about delivering quality, not caring about process, procedure, justice, and certainly not caring about the South African populace. Is this a moment where the business community of South Africa, the business community globally, takes a pause and asks itself some hard questions about its ethics and operations in South Africa, and ask hard questions about whether or not it has the right controls in place to ensure that such things does not happen within their organizations? To join me on this conversation is the founder as well as the chair of Public Interest South Africa, Tebogo Gas, and Advocate Stephanie Fick, the executive director of the Accountability Division at Outer, will be with us in this conversation very shortly. Tebogo, let me start here. Is this a little too late, or is this perfect timing? One, and two, is this substantial enough to change the narrative about state capture, or is it merely cosmetic?
I wouldn't call it cosmetic. In fairness, let us also admit that we have been very hard on the NPA, and especially the NDPP herself, Ms. Shamila Batoyi, or Advocate Shamila Batoyi, and she's had to ward off accusations of being rather moving slow and maybe even at worst, even be accused of being seemingly disinterested in pursuing big actors like the McKenzies and the Bains of this world. So it is a significant step in the right direction. But if you ask me, is it Uhuru? I'll tell you, no, it's not Uhuru. This should be seen as the beginning, not to the end, but actually the beginning of a new chapter of accountability. And we shouldn't be taking it lightly, because it is, with all indications are that Bain is going to appeal this decision, as they are currently doing with the UK decision. They're taking it on appeal through their courts there, because they know that the impact of it is deep and is going to be felt not only on their South African market where they operate, but also in other markets, not less the UK, but also the US, where they are domiciled or registered on the stock exchange or Nasdaq. I can't remember exactly which one it is, but where they've got the responsibility to account to the SEC. And you know, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the SEC doesn't play games. So they do know that should they leave this to stand as it is, the repercussions are going to be wide, deep, and profound. So it is a beginning, like I'm saying. So we must brace ourselves for an arduous process. The MPA, the ID, and even SAPS need our support. Government needs our support to make sure that they do right by South African taxpayers, by South African citizens, but most importantly, by the affected whistleblowers at SARS and elsewhere where Bain has wrecked this country.
Yeah. Mega corporations are incredibly litigious and often have the resources to be litigious. And as you said, there's nothing yet to celebrate, given that all indications are that Bain will appeal this like it's done in the UK. And McKinsey will be in court against the NPA, against the state. McKinsey has a lot of money to fight this out in court. It could bury the state under paperwork forever. The state certainly doesn't have the legal and forensics capacity to fight forever, right? Given that this will become a war of resource as much as it becomes a war of principle and justice, what should the response of the South African populace be? Should it be that, say, the NPA says, look, we kind of do not have the money and resources to adequately fight McKinsey forever?
I don't subscribe to the notion that the state doesn't have resources to follow up criminality, especially those with resources such as Bain, Steinhoff, and so forth, because it gives a wrong impression. Remember, the state is the last defender of our rights and the last legal prosecutor of instance. And with all the resources at its disposal, it ought to be sending out a very clear message to the likes of Bain, and especially companies such as Bain, who, when found guilty, it is such that if fines or reparations are levied against them, they'll be such that they actually cover any and all expenses that the state would have expended on legal. It is just on legal fees. It is just a matter of political will that is more important, because to do otherwise, it is to suggest that big companies are too big to fail or too big to be prosecuted. So in other words, prosecution will only be left for small guys or small fish. But we know that whereas the biggest damage to this economy was caused by the likes of Bain, KPMG, McKinsey, Nedbank, and many others.
Yeah. Advocate Stephanie Fick, thank you so much for joining us. I want to bring you in here at this conversation. How important were the roles and how impactful, adversely so, were the roles of Bain and McKinsey in our state capture story?
I think they did this country enormous damage. I think, I think as a country, this came left field. I mean, you sort of trust that certain organizations will deal with certain things in a certain way, that there's a trust, and they really abused their position and what they were able to do for their own pockets. And I think it will be a long time for us to cure the damage. In other words, I think doesn't matter, it's a different conversation to say, yes, they should be held accountable. But even if they are held accountable, I think the damage they've done, for example, to SARS and just to Transnet and Eskom, the SOEs that are really struggling are the ones where, they had their fingers in the pie. And I think, even if they are held accountable, we are going to struggle for a long time. The damage, economical damage, was just immense.
Yeah. What does accountability look like in this instance? Of course, with Bain, they've been blacklisted for 10 years, can't do business with the state. McKinsey is being prosecuted in court. Is it about the organizations taking accountability, or is it about going after the specific individuals within those organizations that spearheaded this and that enabled for this looting to take place?
I think it's both. I think the individuals, we've seen so many times that, even in government where individuals, they resign and there's no accountability or they're fired or whatever. But there should be accountability for the individuals, but the company should also take some responsibility and accountability for what happened. Because at the end of the day, although, if you really want to dissect this, a company can't act. A company acts because people act on their behalf.
Yeah.
But still, it is a company that makes it possible for people to do a certain job. And I am sure that the amount of damage that was done at SARS, McKinsey and all of that, it wasn't just one person. It took more than one. And a company cannot turn around and say, listen, I didn't know.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
Yeah. Deborah, how do you assess the response of the private sector? The private sector during the Zuma years, during the height of what are termed the state capture years, were quite vocal against the state, were quite vocal against looting taking place and specific executives in certain SOEs. In fact, there was a rally by various organizations, Business Unity South Africa, Business Leadership South Africa, Save South Africa, and all of these organizations had something to say. But nothing yet, and at least nothing consistently vocal, has been said about specifically McKinsey, has been said about specifically Bain. I'm not sure if they're members of any of these forums or organizations, but surely something to that effect about the expulsion, about denouncing their participation, denouncing their existence, and continued, oxygizing continuously McKinsey as well as Bain by other private sector players doing business with them. Surely something should have been said vocally loud and consistently so.
I'm glad you're raising that point, because in this whole milieu, we tend to forget the role that private sector could play in ensuring that we get to the bottom of state capture and even resolve endemic problems that set in motion when state capture ensued. In fact, the private sector was key in enabling state capture, and they kept a blind eye. If you take, for instance, the fact that Bain denied under oath or maybe through papers that they ever had any interactions with Trillian, and it just revealed through the Gupta leak that they were actually involved in this. So there's also further lying in spite of all the lies that we've already had. But also more worrisome is the role that the likes of Business Leadership SA also played in this thing, where Business Leadership SA incredulously came to the defense of Bain when we were asking for Bain to be taken to account, and especially directly asking for Bain to be removed from his membership, to be terminated from the BLSA. And they stoically defended Bain, and it was only later when Bain decided to leave BLSA that BLSA seemed to change its tack. But also, even more so worrisome, is Sasol. Bain is still doing business at Sasol, or at least reportedly so. And Sasol seemed to have said, well, Bain told us that they have changed. Same thing that they've told BLSA. They told us we've changed, they are doing things differently, and we seem to be content with it. When we know that it is not true, And even if they had changed, we haven't seen any demonstrable act of change from Bain. But it doesn't also mean that Bain must be let scot-free, because it needs to still account to the damage that it has caused, not only to SARS, but at Telkom. What role did it play at Telkom? How was it appointed? Were procurement prescripts followed? And did Telkom get value for money? And also DBSA and anywhere else. So the role of private sector cannot be minimized insofar as the role that foreign big companies, especially multinationals, play in corruption in South Africa. And just on that point, we are also waiting with bated breath to see the response from the U.S. State Department and President Biden himself in terms of what is their attitude to the corruption that is caused in South Africa specifically, but in Africa and also in general, especially in developing countries, in spite of the fact that they want to believe that their version of democracy does not have room for corruption, and we should embrace it, when in fact they seem to be keeping a blind eye. We have approached the U.S. Department of Justice. We have had preliminary responses from them in regards to Bain, but there's been a stony silence for months now. It is worrisome when you still see this thing being condoned by the private sector.
Yeah. Advocate Fick, do you think, the very same question, do you think, and I'll add to this, maybe even civil society, do you think the business community and civil society has been condemning enough in great volume of Bain and McKinsey very specifically?
You know what, coming from civil society and a civil activist organization, I can tell you that there's so much to do that, we don't get to everything. So were there enough set? I mean, whistleblowers and has been vocal about it for a very long time. And I think it actually took too long for Bain to sort of be held accountable. And I think private sector should take the plunge and, should not do business with a company like Bain. I can understand that they are saying that they turned over a new leaf. But your accountability, they have destroyed. I want to go as far as saying that they have destroyed lives. If you just think about whistleblowers, and to say, you've turned over a new leaf, I don't think the punishment is enough. And it's really about maybe also not punishment, but taking accountability for what you did.
Yeah. Politicians will parade this as a victory and the end of state capture. Is that so, Advocate Fick?
Yeah, I think, yes, I still think that more could be done. I mean, we're still waiting for prosecutions. We're still waiting for, that orange overalls. So have we done enough? No. I think we are looking forward to even more being done in the fight against corruption, because corruption, although we've come from state capture, we know that's PPE and the corruption in KwaZulu-Natal with the the what happened there. So are we doing enough? No, there's way more to be done, and we need to hold to account each and every one, and making sure ethical leadership, and that this does not happen ever again.
Yeah. Deborah, maybe consider the same question. Is this the end of state capture?
No. In fact, as a matter of fact, I think now Chief Justice Zondo, in his address at the open, is it on the record event hosted by News 24 a few weeks ago, he did make a point, matter of fact, that if we think state capture stopped or ended when the commission started or ended, we are wrong. Actually, that was the tip of the iceberg. State capture continued before, during, and after state capture commission's proceedings. And as a matter of fact, the commission was limited in terms of areas where it looked, because it looked at select SOCs, and it also examined certain transactions involving key politicians and business people and companies. The road runs deep. We haven't even begun to talk about municipalities, the billions that have been going. We haven't begun to talk about state capture of national skills funds. We haven't talked about the capture of the National School of Financial Services, NASFAS. We haven't begun to talk about the capture of the Lottery Board. We haven't spoken about the capture of so many other institutions that are meant to be providing relief and services to the public. So, no, we have barely scratched the surface. What State Capture Commission managed to do was to unearth the extent of the damage or the actors that in state capture did in those selected instances. And Zondo couldn't have done everything because it was also limited by money, but also by time. We're also impatient to say we want results soon enough. We want to see prosecution. So, no, it hasn't stopped, and I don't see it stopping. And it might very well be that as we speak, it's actually happening at an even alarming rate. But that's the cynic in me speaking. We do hope that many people will learn lessons, but we've seen that it doesn't look like lessons are being learned, because daily we get reports of officials being arrested for corruption or for doing X, Y, and Z. It doesn't look like the message has landed.
Stephanie, earlier on, before you joined, I asked Tebogo about the capacity of the NPA, and I perhaps want to ask you that question as well. Very specifically, because has often reached out and said we will assist we will assist the NPA, we will assist the Hawks by empowering them with the forensics capabilities that Outer has within its own organizational infrastructure. Are you worried at all about the capacity of the NPA to adequately prosecute a company as large as McKinsey?
Sure, that's a loaded question, because I do think we need to accept that the NPA, the Hawks, SAPS for that matter, was also captured, and they went through a very difficult period. And to build that organization up from the bottom is not easy. Coming from the prosecuting authority, I have to say though that there are some good people left there that get up each and every day, and like me and you would like to make a difference and would like to see the criminals in court. But there's a lot to do in the NPA. I think if you go to certain courts, they're not functioning properly. Do they have the resources that they need in order to not only prosecute? I have to say that investigating abilities is also extremely important to prosecute someone successfully. So there are some abilities, but I think they need way more. I think we tend to...
Where does its weaknesses lie?
We tend to lose sight of the fact that, not only state capture cases needs to be prosecuted. Each and every day there's crimes. So we keep on talking about state capture, but daily there's prosecutors. And if you think about what they need, is they need experienced prosecutors that can deal with sexual offences, that can deal with intricate fraught matters, that can understand, the forensic side of things, that understands money laundering and how that is, how do we prosecute that? So to say that there's none is unfair. I think really unfair to some of the guys there. But do we have enough? No. I think they need to get the resources from government or from Parliament in order to do more, because we are going to need them.
What does resourcing the NPA looks like? Does it look like giving the NPA more money? And I'm assuming the answer there is obviously yes. Or does it look like experienced, and very specifically niche lawyers and investigators and prosecutors or former prosecutors saying, look, I will leave my lucrative job in private practice. I will leave my lucrative job outside of the state infrastructure. I'll take that pay cut and I'll go work for the NPA to assist them in successfully prosecuting that. I see this as my national duty. In a similar way, judges who take the bench often see that as them fulfilling out their national duty.
agree with you more. I would like to say that, you know what, I think there's a lot of people that will do this for their country. And I need to disagree with you. I think the prosecuting authority actually pays their people, you know, very well. And some of them can't complain. I think private practice, and if you're an attorney and an advocate, you know, although you work for your own pocket, I don't think that the salaries is the problem. It is, you know, if I may, sometimes the political interference in, you know, the NPA, the fact that are they independent, is to keep the independence and just let the prosecutors do what they are good at. But I do think that they need a little bit of experience. It doesn't have to come from you know, the private sector. There are some good prosecutors left on the inside of the NPA, but give them the support. In other words, we're talking about the NPA. The Hawks also needs resources in order to be able to investigate, and maybe forensic companies, although do we still have trust in, you know, all the forensic companies and attorneys firms that I want to say, you know, also looted in the state capture area, but give them the resources. Courts, for example, these prosecutors that's you know, having court in a fault because the buildings are not looked after. Do we have enough interpreters daily to, you know, we have a constitutional right to be tried in our language that we understand. Do we have enough court personnel? So it is not just experience is number one. I think that we need to work on. But then it's all these other things. So yes, they do need money, but they do need experience people.
Yeah. Deborah, final question to you as we wrap up this conversation. In what areas of our relationship with the state, with our relationship with the private sector, and perhaps even civil society should we remain vigilant as we go forward, knowing what we now know about state capture?
I'll respond to your question at the same time. I also agree with what Advocate Fig has said completely about resourcing, and both from a human resource perspective and financial, and making the NPA a preferred employer of choice in terms of the environment. But what is lacking in this discussion, which is glaringly so, is our as society, individuals, civil society, businesses, we need to be able to focus a lot more on erecting guardrails to ensure that we stem the tide of corruption, the venality, the propensity to do good, to do bad, or to keep a blind eye when you see things are going wrong and not say anything about it. We need to work on the ethical citizenship, what we call ethical citizenship, be it in business or be in how we conduct ourselves as citizens, because we are the first and last defenders of this democracy. And if we are just let the moral fiber decay to the extent that it has, we are going to see more and more corruption faster, to the extent that it doesn't matter how much money we put in the resource in the criminal justice system, we may just we'll just got overcome by corruption.
Yeah. Deborah Kas, the founder of Public Interest South Africa, as well as Advocate Stephanie Fick, the Executive Director of the Accountability Division at OUTA. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Really, really do appreciate your contribution and insights in this conversation.
Only a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you to you for listening. Thank you earlier to our first guest, Colin Coleman. It's been an insightful episode, another installment of This Week Today. And that's the end of the show. I do want to say, though, that I am back with you all of next week on SAfm Sunrise, standing in for Stephen Grooters. So do join me bright and early Monday morning, 6 a.m. As we continue the conversation and as we ask the critical questions that build up our democracy. And thank you to the team. Lisego was not here with us today, but Ntabi Seng was. Thank you to Phineas, our technical producer, as well as David, who's our audiovisual director for the show. Really, really do appreciate it. And importantly, by the way, David just reminded me about this. Very importantly, next week's episode of This Week Today will be a special episode. It will be episode number 2 of the SAfm Debate Challenge. This time around, it will be the University of Pretoria versus Tshwane University of Technology. A scintillating topic that they will be debating. Details will go live on Monday if you would like to attend that debate live here at the SABC building. I'm very excited for the debate. The first installment was amazing. If you missed it, go onto the SAFM YouTube channel at SAFM Radio, watch it live, watch it back, and join us live next week as we have the second installment of that. It is 7 o'clock. Time for your news.
Independent and impartial. This is SAFM News.
Load shedding likely to continue and celebrations over Russia.